I wasn't supposed to be in that part of town. I took a wrong turn after work and ended up behind a closed grocery store, the kind with flickering lights and empty carts pushed against a fence. That's when I saw a car parked far from the road, engine off, windows fogged. Something made me slow down. Inside the car, I recognized my sister. Calla looked thinner than I remembered. Her hair pulled back like she hadn't bothered to fix it in days. She was sitting in the driver's seat, slightly bent forward, both arms wrapped around her son. Evan was asleep against her chest, his body supported by pillows and straps I didn't fully understand. She held him tightly, like if she let go, something terrible would happen. The back seat was packed with bags, medical supplies, and folded blankets. A small portable device hummed softly near Evan's legs. The car wasn't messy. It was organized in a careful, desperate way, like someone trying to make a home where no home should exist. I stood there longer than I should have. Calla didn't see me at first. She was whispering to Evan, promising him things I couldn't hear. When she finally noticed me, her face changed fast. Not relief, not anger, just embarrassment. She opened the window a little and smiled like this was temporary, like this was nothing. She said they were fine. She said they were just between places. Her voice was calm, but her hands were shaking. I offered to help. She thanked me, but she didn't ask for anything. That hurt more than if she had. Before I left, she adjusted Evan's blanket and kissed his forehead, careful not to wake him. As I drove away, I couldn't stop thinking about how quiet everything was. No shouting. No drama. Just a sister protecting her child in the dark. At that moment, I still believed this was bad luck. I didn't yet understand that what I was looking at had been caused by something much closer to home. Growing up, I was always the one people relied on. I followed rules, planned ahead, and stayed quiet when things got hard. Our parents used to say I was built for responsibility. If something needed to be handled, they handed it to me without question. I learned early that being dependable meant being trusted. Calla was different. She felt everything deeply and showed it. She cried easily, trusted too fast, and made choices with her heart instead of her head. When things went wrong for her, our parents worried. When things went right for me, they relaxed. That was the pattern in our house. Money was the clearest example. If there was a bill to pay or paperwork to sign, it came to me. Calla wasn't careless, but our parents believed she would be overwhelmed. They said I was better with numbers and decisions. Over time, I started believing that too. At family gatherings, relatives praised me for being steady. They spoke to Calla gently, like she might break if pushed too hard. I became the one who fixed problems. Calla became the one people fixed things for. I didn't resent her at first. I thought this was just how our roles worked. I protected, she depended. I handled pressure, she needed support. It felt balanced in a strange way. But as we grew older, that balance hardened into something else. I stopped seeing Calla as an equal. I saw her as someone who needed guidance, even control. When she disagreed with me, I brushed it off. When she trusted me, I accepted it without question. By the time we were adults, the roles were so set that no one challenged them. Not our parents. Not Calla. And not me. That belief, that I always knew better, quietly shaped every decision that came after. When Calla became pregnant, she was hopeful in a way that scared me. She talked about fresh starts and second chances, like this baby would fix everything that had ever gone wrong in her life. For a while, it seemed like it might. She was calmer, more focused, and careful with every plan she made. Evan's birth changed that overnight. Complications came fast, and the doctors spoke in careful, serious tones. They explained that Evan would need ongoing medical care, special equipment, and constant attention. Calla listened without interrupting, holding her son while trying to understand a future she hadn't imagined. Her husband didn't stay long after that. At first, he made excuses, work stress, needing space, promises to come back later. Then the calls slowed down. Then they stopped. One day, his things were gone, and that was the end of it. Calla never said his name again. She focused everything on Evan. Her days filled with appointments, forms, and long nights without sleep. She learned how to lift him carefully, how to read small changes in his breathing, How to stay calm when machines made unfamiliar sounds. She couldn't do it alone. That's when she turned to family. She believed that blood meant safety, that family stepped in when the world failed you. She called me when she didn't understand medical bills. She asked me to explain paperwork. She trusted me to help her make sense of things. I stepped into that role easily. I told myself I was helping, that I was doing what an older sister should do. Kala thanked me often, sometimes too much. She never questioned my advice. She never doubted my intentions. Watching her with Evan was painful and humbling. She gave up everything without complaint. And through all of it, she believed she wasn't alone. She believed I would never let her fall. When our parents died, everything felt heavy and quiet. There were no big arguments, no fights over belongings. Just paperwork, lawyers, and decisions that had to be made while everyone was still grieving. That was when the trust was explained. It wasn't meant to make anyone rich. It was meant to make sure Evan would always be cared for. Our parents chose me as the executor. No one questioned it. It felt natural, almost expected. Kala didn't hesitate for a second. She said she was relieved it was me. She said she wouldn't know what to do without my help. The trust documents were clear. The money was for Evan's medical care, housing and long-term needs. It was supposed to protect him when no one else could. I told Kala I would handle everything and keep her informed. She nodded, exhausted, grateful, and willing to let go of one more burden. At first, I did exactly what I promised. I paid bills, organized accounts, and spoke to professionals on her behalf. Kala signed where I told her to sign. She didn't read closely. She trusted me to watch out for her son like he was my own. Over time, the responsibility began to feel like ownership. The money sat there, untouched, while my own problems grew quietly in the background. I told myself I understood the system better than Kala ever could. I convinced myself that having control meant having the right to decide. Each choice I made felt small, technical, necessary. I told myself I was being practical, not selfish. Kala never checked. She never asked for proof. She believed the trust meant safety, and she believed I was that safety. That trust gave me freedom. No one watching. No one questioning. Just me, the accounts, and the belief that I knew best. I didn't see it as betrayal then. I saw it as control. And control felt deserved. When our parents died, everything felt heavy and quiet. There were no big arguments, no fights over belongings. Just paperwork, lawyers, and decisions that had to be made while everyone was still grieving. That was when the trust was explained. It wasn't meant to make anyone rich. It was meant to make sure Evan would always be cared for. Our parents chose me as the executor. No one questioned it. It felt natural, almost expected. Kala didn't hesitate for a second. She said she was relieved it was me. She said she wouldn't know what to do without my help. The trust documents were clear. The money was for Evan's medical care, housing and long-term needs. It was supposed to protect him when no one else could. I told Kala I would handle everything and keep her informed. She nodded, exhausted, grateful, and willing to let go of one more burden. At first, I did exactly what I promised. I paid bills, organized accounts, and spoke to professionals on her behalf. Kala signed where I told her to sign. She didn't read closely. She trusted me to watch out for her son like he was my own. Over time, the responsibility began to feel like ownership. The money sat there, untouched, while my own problems grew quietly in the background. I told myself I understood the system better than Kala ever could. I convinced myself that having control meant having the right to decide. Each choice I made felt small, technical, necessary. I told myself I was being practical, not selfish. Kala never checked. She never asked for proof. She believed the trust meant safety, and she believed I was that safety. That trust gave me freedom. No one watching. No one questioning. Just me, the accounts, and the belief that I knew best. I didn't see it as betrayal then. I saw it as control. And control felt deserved. The problems started slowly. Kala called to say her rent had gone up, and the assistance she expected hadn't arrived. She sounded confused, not angry. I told her delays were normal and advised her to wait. She trusted that answer, and tried to manage on her own. A few months later, she said she was behind on payments. Medical costs were piling up, and caring for Evan made it impossible to work steady hours. I acted concerned and told her I was reviewing the accounts. I said things were tight but under control. That wasn't true, but she believed it. Soon she had to leave her apartment. She moved into a smaller place, farther from Evan's doctors. I told myself it was temporary, that she would adjust. When she mentioned selling furniture to cover expenses, I nodded like it was a reasonable choice. The car was next. Repairs she couldn't afford, payments she couldn't catch up on. I knew exactly how much money was left and how little I had done to protect it. Still, I said nothing. I sent kind messages. I used careful words. I never offered real help. From a distance, I watched her life shrink. Fewer calls. Shorter conversations. She stopped asking questions and started apologizing for bothering me. That should have stopped me. It didn't. When she finally admitted she didn't have a place to stay, I told her I was sorry and promised to look into options. I didn't. I told myself there was nothing I could do without making things worse. I convinced myself this was the result of bad luck, not my choices. I said she would figure it out like she always did. Meanwhile, I went on with my life, knowing exactly why hers was falling apart and choosing not to step in. By the time she disappeared from my regular routine, I had already decided not to ask where she was sleeping. Some answers felt too dangerous to hear. The cold cut through my coat as I stepped out of the car to throw something away. That's when I heard a soft voice nearby, calm but tired. I turned and saw Calla standing near her car, speaking to a man who looked like security. Evan was inside, surrounded by equipment that took up most of the back seat. Tubes, bags, and a small machine were packed so tightly there was barely space left. Calla spoke carefully, explaining that they weren't causing trouble. She said they would leave soon. Her voice was steady, practiced, like she'd had this conversation many times before. When the man asked if she had help, she smiled and nodded. "My sister is handling things," she said. "She's trying to fix everything." I felt that sentence hit harder than any accusation could have. She said it without hesitation, like it was a fact she never doubted. I stayed frozen, watching her defend me to someone who didn't even know my name. The man eventually walked away. Calla leaned against the car and closed her eyes for a second, breathing slowly before opening the door to check on Evan. She adjusted something near his seat and whispered to him, her movements gentle and precise. I stepped closer, and she noticed me. For a moment, there was surprise. Then that same polite smile appeared. She didn't ask why I was there or where I'd been. She didn't complain. She just talked about Evan's appointment the next morning and how cold it was getting at night. She thanked me for coming by. She said she knew I was busy and doing my best. I nodded, unable to correct her. The words sat heavy between us, unspoken and dangerous. When I left, she waved like this was a normal goodbye. As I drove away, her voice stayed with me. Not angry, not accusing, just loyal. And that made everything I had done feel impossible to escape. Things changed after one of Evan's hospital visits. A woman came into the room while Calla was distracted with paperwork. She asked quiet questions, the kind that sounded friendly but carried weight. Where were they staying? Who helped with care? Calla answered honestly, without realizing what those answers meant. A few days later, I received a call I wasn't expecting. Someone introduced themselves and said they were reviewing Evan's case. They mentioned concerns about housing and finances. I felt my stomach tighten, but I kept my voice calm. I said there must be a mistake. Letters followed. Then more calls. I was asked to provide documents, statements, explanations. The trust was mentioned directly. For the first time, I couldn't redirect the situation with confidence. The system wasn't listening to my tone or my role. It wanted facts. Calla called me that night. Her voice sounded different. Careful. She said someone had asked about the money meant for Evan. She said she was confused and needed help understanding what was happening. I told her not to worry, that these things happen sometimes. But she didn't stop asking. She wanted to see records. She wanted timelines. She said she needed to be sure Evan was protected. That word, protected, made me pause. Soon after, official requests arrived. bank statements, transaction histories. Everything I had kept quiet was now being pulled into the open. I tried to organize explanations, to create reasons that would sound reasonable. But the gaps were too wide. Calla stopped thanking me. She stopped apologizing. Her questions became specific, direct. She wasn't accusing me yet, but the trust she once gave so freely was no longer there. I realized then that I was no longer in control of the story. Other people were reading the numbers. Other people were deciding what they meant. And Calla, for the first time in her life, was no longer just listening. She was looking. The courtroom was quiet in a way that made every sound feel too loud. Chairs scraped the floor as people settled in. I kept my eyes forward, trying not to look at Calla. When I finally did, she was sitting straight, Evan beside her, his hands folded in his lap. She didn't look at me at all. A screen lit up at the front of the room. Dates appeared. Then numbers. One transaction after another filled the space, clear and impossible to ignore. Each one was read aloud slowly. Amounts taken out. Accounts moved between. Purposes listed that had nothing to do with Evan's care. My name followed every line. I felt the room shift as people began to understand what they were seeing. There was no emotion in the way it was presented. Just facts. Cold and exact. The kind that didn't need explanation to feel heavy. The judge leaned forward and asked me to stand. I did, my legs stiff and unsteady. He asked why money set aside for a disabled child's medical care was used to cover business losses, rent, and personal expenses. His voice wasn't angry. It was calm, which somehow made it worse. I tried to speak. The words came out slow and uncertain. I talked about pressure, about mistakes, about intentions that didn't matter anymore. The more I explained, the smaller the reasons sounded. The screen didn't change. It stayed there, showing everything I had done without judgment or mercy. Each line was proof I couldn't talk my way out of. I glanced at Calla again. Her face was pale but steady. She wasn't crying. She wasn't reacting at all. She just watched the screen, like she was seeing something she had already accepted. When the judge told me to sit, I felt exposed in a way I never had before. Not misunderstood. Not unlucky. Just seen. And in that moment, I knew there was no version of this where I walked away unchanged. When Calla was called to speak, the room felt even quieter. She walked to the front slowly, her movements careful, like she was holding herself together one step at a time. She took the seat and placed her hands flat in front of her. For a moment, she looked down, then lifted her eyes. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't ask the court for sympathy. She spoke the way she always had, soft, clear, and honest. She said she trusted me because I was her sister. She said she believed family meant protection, not paperwork or proof. She explained how she followed my guidance without question. How she signed documents she didn't fully understand because she believed I would never put Evan at risk. She said she never imagined she would need to double-check someone who grew up beside her. Then she talked about Evan. About missed appointments because they couldn't travel. About nights spent in places that weren't safe or warm enough. She didn't describe them in detail. She didn't need to. The way she paused between sentences said enough. She said the hardest part wasn't losing money. It was watching her son lose stability, lose privacy, lose the simple dignity of having a place that belonged to him. She said she blamed herself for trusting too easily, but she never blamed Evan. At no point did she look at me. She spoke to the judge, to the room, to the truth she had carried alone for too long. Her voice stayed steady even when her hands trembled slightly. When she finished, she thanked the court and returned to her seat. There was no anger in her expression, just exhaustion and clarity. Sitting there, I understood something I hadn't before. Her testimony wasn't meant to hurt me. It was meant to protect her son. And in doing that, it showed exactly what my choices had taken from her. The judge's words hit harder than I expected. The verdict was clear and final. I had to repay every cent I took. Criminal charges would follow. The papers were signed, the gavel struck, and just like that, the courtroom felt heavier than it had before. People in the room stared. Some shook their heads quietly, others whispered. I looked around, hoping for a familiar face, someone who might soften the blow. There was none. Not a single relative rose to defend me. No one I thought I could count on said a word. Calla sat beside Evan, calm but tired. She didn't smile. She didn't gloat. She just held his hand and stayed composed, the way she always had, even when things were hardest. I realized then that I had lost more than money or control. I had lost trust, respect, and the idea that my family would ever look at me the same way. My own voice felt small when I tried to speak. I wanted to explain, to justify, to beg, but the room didn't listen. The judge had spoken. My lawyer sat quietly, and the truth of my actions filled every space I had once dominated. Outside the courtroom, reporters and strangers whispered, and I felt invisible and exposed at the same time. Calls I expected didn't come. Messages I hoped for stayed unread. The life I had built on control, trust, and appearances unraveled in front of me, and there was no one to catch it. I walked away that day knowing that nothing I could say or do would change what had happened. The consequences were mine alone. The trust one had broken, the harm I caused, and the people I failed. There was no undoing it. And the reality of that truth settled in like a weight I couldn't lift. Calla didn't look back as we left the courtroom. She held Evan's hand tightly, his small fingers curled around hers. There was no celebration, no victory smile. She didn't need to prove anything to me or anyone else. The truth had already spoken for her. Outside, the sun was weak and cold, but she walked steadily, carrying herself with a quiet strength I had never fully noticed before. The social workers who had been involved met her, offering support, housing options, and medical resources for Evan. For the first time in months, she didn't have to worry about where they would sleep or how she would keep him safe. Her revenge wasn't about shouting, exposing me, or humiliating me. It was simply surviving. It was rebuilding a life for her son that I had almost stolen. Each step she took was proof that trust could be broken, but resilience could still remain. I walked behind them, feeling the weight of everything I had done. The money I stole, the lies I told, the control I clung to, all of it pressed down on me like a shadow I couldn't shake. Calla didn't need to act. She didn't need to punish me. The court, the truth, and her own courage had done it for her. I realized then that real power wasn't in manipulation or taking advantage of someone's trust. Real power was in staying upright when the world knocked you down. Calla had done that, and I had failed. As she and Evan disappeared down the street, supported and safe, I was left alone with my choices. The revenge she achieved wasn't in anger or confrontation. It was in the life she reclaimed. And for the first time, I truly understood the cost of betrayal, not in money or punishment, but in what it takes to lose the people you once claimed to love.
Some stories don't end, they follow you. If this one stayed in your mind, you know what to do.